Look at me, son. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
It's time to analyse that scene, the iconic one, the one you've all been waiting for from the very moment I first set out to analyse all the therapy scenes from Good Will Hunting. Can I start for a moment, however, on a slightly personal note, because I've been hesitant to make this video for a very long time. I'll leave text for where to skip ahead to and a timestamp if you just want me to get on with the analysis, but this series fundamentally changed my life. I never had any plans for YouTube. I wrote one long comment on a Good Will Hunting video where I just analysed some of the scene in the comment, and I logged in 6 months later to see tons of likes and replies encouraging me to make a full video, so I did. Then I started making other videos because I found it fun, and when I encountered copyright issues I didn't yet understand, I re-uploaded a copyright-friendly version of the first 2 Good Will Hunting videos, only this time the series took off. Suddenly the first video had over 1 million views and I was able to monetize my channel, and right at the very moment I needed it most, in the middle of lockdown, I had a bit of income again. Not a huge amount, but combined with my counselling, enough to get by on, stable enough to continue doing the things I love, affordable counselling and making YouTube videos. You've all made that possible for me. So much good in my life has sprung directly from this channel. The sheer luck and miracle of me starting this channel and it taking off. The confidence I've gained in myself from lots of different things that have sprung out of this channel, and just from discovering that my ordinary thoughts from me as my authentic self have value to a lot of you. The things I've learned, the opportunities I've found, and friendships I've made. And I may even hit 100,000 subscribers by the time I've won the inevitable copyright dispute and been able to release this video, which to me is huge. In the grand scheme of things, I'm still a pretty small YouTuber. I get less income from this than my girlfriend earns in her job. When my views are low, I'm not earning much at all, but I'm still getting by doing the things I love, so thank you. And yet I've been hesitant to make this video because it's the last video in the series, probably. I might talk more generally about the film as a whole, but only if I really find enough to meaningfully say. I don't want to drag on a series for the sake of it, so this could be the end of the very series that is the whole reason A, my channel got so big, and B, I created a channel at all to begin with. What comes next? I don't know. For a while I worried a lot of you would unsubscribe by the time we finish this, that there's those of you who are only here for the Good Will Hunting videos, but I don't believe that anymore. I think that's just self-doubt. And I've got other series, of course, one breaking down the entirety of Spirited Away, one analysing all the characters from The Breakfast Club, discussing Nolan's Batman trilogy, a symbolism series, a therapy series going through the fictional case study written by acclaimed clinical psychologist Daniel Hughes, various other ones I can't think of at the moment. But this series in particular, and the Breakfast Club series I suppose, are the ones I'm known for, if I can say that I'm known. The ones that define my channel more than any, and both of those series are nearing their completion now. I don't know what I'll do next, other than continue the other series I've got, and I have ideas obviously, but I'll likely test things out, do polls, see what interests all of you, and hope I can find another series that you can feel just as much love and support for as you have done with this. But I guess I've been saying I've been hesitant because I didn't want this series to end, but we're here now. So I'm going to enjoy it and then start looking to the future. I want to do YouTube for the rest of my life. I hope you'd all like to stay with me on that journey. So here we are, ready to finally discuss the It's Not Your Fault scene. The one that makes this film so iconic that so many people have differing opinions about. It's a deeply moving scene that I'm afraid for copyright reasons I'll have to fragment and pause and jump around a lot like in all my other videos while I analyse it. In many ways it's quite a straightforward, self-explanatory scene, though I also have a great deal to say about it, but we need to begin where this session actually begins, which is not with Will, but Jerry. If you watched the previous episode, we left off with Sean kicking Will out of the session for not taking his questions seriously, at which point Will stopped going to sessions, and also broke up with Skylar before we got the touching scene between him and Chucky.
If you're still living here,
coming over my house to watch the Patriots game, still working construction, I'll fucking kill you.
Jerry, now discovering Will has stopped going to sessions, calls Sean up and they then meet here in his office.
This is a disaster, Sean. I brought you in here because I wanted you to help me with the boy, not to run him out.
Stellan Skarsgård is great in this scene. Jerry is standing over Sean, pacing, despite the fact it's Sean's office, and taking on a very teacher role, really. He's trying to assert that he's in charge. He brought Sean in. Sean's work with Will is to help Jerry, what Jerry's trying to do, which, of course, is technically true. In a sense, Jerry did reach out to Sean to get him to counsel Will, but Sean's priority is not to help Jerry at all. It can't be. His priority is to Will himself, as it always is in counselling. I labour that slightly obvious point though, because situations similar to this meeting here do happen, where you're seeing a client and something goes wrong or is felt to go wrong, and the parents or whoever it is, Jerry in this example, flips the lids about it. It's a disaster, it's all gone wrong, maybe you're not the right counsellor, maybe you've just made things worse, sort of thing. All of those feelings, which are perfectly understandable because a lot of stress and anxiety can get wrapped up when somebody you know and care about is having counselling. I think I've been quite critical of Jerry a lot in the past with these videos, but he's basically inspired by Will's genius and does sincerely wish him to do well. A lot of that might be wrapped up in his own desires about greatness, his fears about failure and everything, but he also does care about Will. He recognises Will's brilliance, and it does hurt him to see Will, out of pain, waste a lot of it in his view. Fearing that Will could easily end up in prison someday, it's hugely stressful for him and anxiety inducing. It's a difficult situation to be in, so perhaps in desperation you seek out a counsellor to help this person you care about. And sometimes your stress is so great that you idealise this counsellor at first, let's say, sparing yourself the worry by imagining they'll wave some magic wand and fix everything in no time. But often it takes time, and just as often things go wrong or appear to go wrong. And when that happens, and when you do already have a lot of stress and worry on behalf of this person you care about who's receiving counselling and someone you just want to do well, that stress can turn to anger at the therapist. You can feel betrayed when something's felt to go wrong. You know, well, weren't you supposed to help them? I was expecting this magic wand, but now I feel even more worried than I did before they started seeing you. In Jerry's case, I don't think he did idealise Sean's therapy. I think he kept a fixed wariness, too afraid to quite hope, and so when, like now, things appear to have gone wrong, Jerry can affirm that he was right all along. I knew this would be bad. I was correct. And what I'm getting towards is that from a counselling standpoint, this is why it can be good to have some contact with the parents and such. It can be useful to help them understand counselling a little more, to help them trust the process, let's say, to recognise that sometimes there are natural blips or that things can appear to get worse before they get better. Sometimes it's useful to allay their reservations about counselling, perhaps to help them understand you're not here to judge their parenting ability or anything. Sometimes when you counsel a child's parents, they start worrying the kid will tell you all sorts of stories about how terrible parents they are and that you're going to judge them harshly based on the kid's perspective, and they might then try to stop the kid from being open with you as a result because they don't want to feel judged and shamed. So in those situations it can be useful to explain that's not how counselling works. Some counsellors don't like to have contact with anyone except the client because it might muddy their perception of how the client sees everything. And I think obviously you need less contact when you're counselling someone who's already an adult. It's different with little kids, I suppose. There's also worries about how it affects your trust and the confidentiality if you're talking to people around the client. But on the other hand, done well, having some contact with their general network can help allay fears. It can help the parents reframe some of their feelings towards their child in a healthier light, some of whatever dynamic is causing issue between them. In an instance like this, though, where something bad has felt to happen, I think you'd hope to prevent the parents or Jerry from flying off the handle and immediately deciding, right, this counsellor can't be any good, and then just terminating the sessions without the client even getting so much as a goodbye. That is the worst case scenario. In this instance, things have technically gone wrong in the sense Will has stopped coming to sessions. He is expected by court ruling to attend. As I said last time, while I understand the logic of Sean kicking him out and understand why it could work, it is an experience of abandonment that I would certainly never risk doing, particularly with someone like Will. Had Will truly given up prior to his talk with Chucky? We don't know. Perhaps he never plans to come back at all. Perhaps he just wanted to skip 1 or 2 in Rebellion in order to make the point, well, I don't have to be here either. I can turn my back on you just as much as you can turn your back on me. I think that's what Sean's imagining and hoping would be the case. We can think how this rebellion here, if it is a rebellion, could parallel the park bench scene where Sean told him.
You move, Chief.
And how that moment was followed up by Will expressing rebellion in his silence for several sessions before finally opening up. Is Sean kicking Will out here again symbolically saying, your move, Chief, and Will not turning up showing that same rebellion form of silence until he's finally ready to show up? Maybe. We can't say. It's still a hell of a risk that, in this instance, does pay off. Because I will say this, it's a very nice reversal of how things ended in their first session together. Back then, things also went very wrong, and however, to Will's surprise, Sean actively decided to see Will again, and to try and repair the rupture, rather than that just to be the end of their work. For Will, that was a healthy experience of how relationships can sometimes be repaired. And this time things went wrong again, but it's Will who actively makes the step to come back. Will, this time, who repairs the relationship, which of course is an even stronger experience because he got to do it. I think that's why Sean isn't calling Will up to come back and doesn't want to fret over it. I think he's waiting to see if Will can take that chance to do something positive himself. The fact Will here tries to repair things rather than just run away and convince himself he never even cared about Sean, that shows not just how far Will has progressed already, but also that the very experience of choosing to come back is even more progression in itself. It says, I can repair things. I have that power. But we'll get to Will in a moment. We're still with Jerry feeling betrayed and calling everything a disaster.
I don't care if you have a rapport with the boy. I don't care if you have a few laughs, even at my expense, but don't you dare undermine what I'm trying to do here.
I just love the assumption Jerry has here that Sean and Will sit around making jokes at his expense. I think that says a great deal about what Jerry imagines counselling to be. Some place where people do just sit around building rapport, cracking jokes like friends, and it's only driven, ambitious people like Jerry who see the virtue in pushing Will. Perhaps in his mind Sean's work is the complete opposite of Jerry's beliefs, and he's been happy to tolerate it only as long as it works, but now, since it appears not to work, he's intervening. But in reality we know Sean 100% pushes Will. We know they don't just sit around cracking jokes and building rapport, it's just a case of pushing in the right way at the right times. I think it is the very difficult skill of a counsellor to, in some small ways, manage the external network around the client. I think that's probably one of the difficult things about the job when there are issues that need to be done that way. Contain all Jerry's fears and anxieties and anger here well enough that it doesn't have a negative effect.
But don't you dare undermine what I'm trying to do here.
Undermine.
I think you could say Jerry's so caught up in his stress that he's seeing Sean's work as a sabotage now of him. If he was calmer, he'd probably think a bit differently, but either way, Sean, doesn't seem to be managing and easing Jerry's fears, because we can see Sean himself getting impatient and annoyed too.
This boy is at a fragile point right now.
I do understand he is at a fragile point, okay? He's got problems.
I think this is why it tends to be standard practice to not counsel A, people you know, and B, people in connection with people you know. You don't want situations like this developing where whatever history you have with each other might bleed into the work with the client. Where the personal conflicts between Sean and Jerry as people become mirrored in a conflict over Will, which just doesn't help anything. Sean isn't as able to contain and remain calm here because he knows Jerry. Because of their history, because he's always been slightly annoyed by him in the past, it inhibits his ability to do his job well here. And there's obviously other reasons not to counsel people you have a connection with. Jerry might feel he deserves some insight into the confidential work because he's Sean's friend, for example. Or when things don't seem to be going well, he might consider Sean isn't professional because he views him from the perspective of a friend. Tons of reasons it can cause issues, for which counsellors often advise people they know to seek other therapists if they want the best help. Not always, obviously. I think there's different kind of rules and guidelines about this, probably depending on where you live. It might work fine counselling someone you have a connection to. It might, but you can't know for sure what will happen until the work starts, and by then it's kind of too late.
Well, what problems does he have, Sean? That he's better off as a janitor? That he's better off in jail? Better off hanging out with a bunch of retarded gorillas?
There's the fear, you see. His condescending, rude opinion of Will's friends can make it easy to overlook, but what problems does he have that he's better off in jail? AKA, I'm afraid that if Will doesn't knuckle down soon, he's going to end up in prison. Or even that he'll spend his whole life coming over Chucky's house to watch Patriots games and work in construction kind of thing. Jerry is terrified of that possibility, hence all his anger. Anger both at Sean and at Will, and if Sean can speak to that fear, hopefully the anger will soften. But this is all also fueled by Jerry's personal feelings, his own fear that if he hadn't pushed himself tremendously when he was young, he would never have reached his heights, which in his eyes would have felt like a failure. So he imagines the same for Will, and Jerry holds tight to his field medal because it helps distance him from the inner feelings about failure he's been running from. The failure he projects onto Will's possible future in jail, the failure he projects onto Sean, seen as this smart man whose life turned into a mess in Jerry's eyes. All of his own fears right now are bleeding into the work with Will, and Sean, too close to Jerry, can't help but lose his temper.
Oh, why do you think he does that, Jerry? Do you have any fucking clue why?
But Jerry doesn't want to stop to consider that question. He's too worked up in his own feelings to really be able to stop right now and think, so he just responds,
He can handle the problems. He can handle the work, and he obviously handled you.
the implication there being that they're both getting played by Will, because he's such a mathematical genius and can handle mathematical problems, he therefore handles everything and has been manipulating them both. Which is quite a leap in logic, really. It probably reflects how Jerry feels outsmarted by Will. I don't know. Anyway, Sean now tries again to get Jerry to understand Will.
Why is he hiding? Why doesn't he trust anybody? Because the first thing that happened to him, he was abandoned by the people who were supposed to love him the
Oh,
most.
come on, don't give me that Freud.
All right.
Jerry is clearly not in the right frame of mind at the moment to think about Will properly. He dismisses the idea. He's too angry still. Angry not just at Sean, but at Will as well. He doesn't want to empathise at the moment, probably not until he calms down after he's got his own feelings off his chest, so he dismisses what is quite clearly true as just psychological nonsense. As Sean goes on, he collapses into a chair holding his head, exhausted. In body language even, he's too worn out to be able to take on and empathise with Will's feelings.
And who's he handling? He pushes people away before they have a chance to leave him. It's a defense mechanism, all right? And for 20 years he's been alone because of that.
I think as people we very quickly turn cold at the idea of any sort of handling or manipulation. Manipulative is often a very, very negative word. You know, we might empathise well when someone's pain or trauma causes them to be irrationally angry in situations or that sort of thing. But if their pain leads them to do anything we might interpret as manipulation, we tend not to empathise, but to retaliate. You know, Will does try to dictate relationships a lot of the time. Sometimes it can feel unsafe to let them develop as they are. As Sean said, he'll push people away at the first sign of trouble, and when that happening to you makes you feel like you've been manipulated, and with how helpless and humiliated being manipulated can make us feel, which perhaps is sometimes the point, projecting those powerless, humiliated, helpless feelings onto us. But when that happens, we can become unfairly critical in response. Ultimately though, manipulation, outside the realm of political scheming and career advancement maybe, is a defence mechanism. Even if it's quite a broad and loose term for one just to say being manipulative, but not a defence to give into and let it dictate all your actions, no, but not one to lead revenge and retaliation against either. I suppose I just felt like saying that. Tangent aside.
And if you push him right now, it's going to be the same thing all over again, and I'm not going to let that happen to him.
This is where the argument now really begins to derail into personal feelings. It starts again with an assumption from Jerry that they're talking about failure, the one thing he himself is most afraid of.
Don't infect him with the idea that it's okay to quit, that it's okay to be a failure, because it's not okay, Sean.
It is okay. We all know you don't achieve anything without encountering failure, and learning how to cope with failure is hugely important, and I suppose to an extent you can argue Will is afraid of failure in the sense
All you see is every negative thing 10 miles down the road.
and that fear leaves him paralysed to make any advances at all. But I also don't think that's exactly Will's situation. This is clearly more to do with Jerry's assumptions, as he adds.
And if you're angry at me for being successful, for being what you could have been, Sean.
I'm not angry.
Somehow, Jerry and Sean's own conflict of one who achieved great success and recognition, yet struggles with an inherent fear of failure that fuels a level of insecure vanity, and another who works in a run-down-looking college with mostly bored students, wrote a book nobody read, and is only picked as fourth choice for counselling clients. In Jerry's eyes, of course, Sean is jealous. Jerry was the one who used to always feel below Sean and less smarter when they were students.
You were smarter than me then, and you're smarter than me now, so don't blame me for how your life turned
And
out.
so now, choosing to interpret Sean's career as a failure and mistake in comparison to his own spares him needing to feel like that sense of failure. It frames him as the one on top, projects everything he used to feel in their relationship onto Sean.
I'm not angry at you, Jeff.
Oh, yes, you're angry at me, Sean. You resent me.
I don't think I need to explain much more of this argument. I think I already did, and I've basically been half repeating myself since in order to solidify the point. The argument escalates further into more personal attacks, despite Sean trying to make clear.
Not about you, you mathematical dick! It's about the boy!
Will has been outside the door listening. He comes in and interrupts them.
I can come back. I'll come in. I was just leaving.
So let's get to actually discussing the session now. This is a deeply awkward and troubling situation for Sean to find himself in as a counsellor. It's not his fault. I have to stress this, nor is it Jerry's. Jerry would naturally want to talk to Sean about his concerns, especially since they know each other, and because of their shared history, it very naturally veers away into an argument that it's difficult for Sean to stay set apart from. This sort of thing isn't great, obviously. It's good to try and prevent happening, but when it does, you do the best you can with the situation, and that starts with Sean telling Will the most important thing.
A lot of that stuff goes back a long way between me and him. You know, not about you.
It isn't Will's fault they're arguing. It's not. He's the topic of the argument, but not the real emotion behind it. Then he turns away to pick up Will's file, which obviously wouldn't be a good thing to leave lying around for Will to see. It could make him feel exposed, like maybe Sean does just see him as some kind of case study or something, rather than someone he cares for. Or it could make him worry, what thoughts is Sean writing down about me? Am I being judged and evaluated? Which obviously could have a bad impact on their relationship. But the file has been left out. Perhaps because it was there for his meeting with Jerry, perhaps because he was doing work on it and Will turned up at a time he didn't expect. It doesn't seem like this is Will's actual session time, I'm not entirely sure though. So again, I guess by bad circumstance, the file is left out when Will comes in. Sean can then either try to hide the file discreetly, to ignore it and just hope Will doesn't notice while he's there, or he can do what he does, which is pick it up and absently sort of flick through it.
What is it?
This is your file. I have to send it back to the judge for evaluation.
I've never personally done the sort of work where you'd need to send files to judges for evaluation. I've given feedback and reports and things, obviously, but never anything major. As such, I don't entirely know about this myself. I'd be interested for anyone to comment. But I imagine it would be important to open up some dialogue with Will about that evaluation. I think talking a little bit about it, seeing how Will feels about it, about what will happen to him, about what it's like, it's an important part of the general process of ending therapy with someone. Endings are in many ways the trickiest part of therapy, because as much as the therapy itself could have been a positive experience, it needs, or at least helps a great deal, to end with proper closure. Sometimes the experience of providing the client with a good ending is more important and impactful than the rest of the entire therapy altogether. And I think there's truth in that for Will. Someone who's used to being abandoned, can he be given an experience of an ending, of saying goodbye to someone that he can manage and can feel sad and painful but is still positive? An ending you can grieve in some small ways and allow yourself to miss the person you're losing rather than to shut it all out and just cut everything off. So as they are getting near to the end, it makes sense to talk about this evaluation for the judge. You know, it's a thing they both know is going to happen. It seems the more honest and authentic thing to talk about it to Will. not exactly telling what you're going to write and that sort of thing, but what the experience is like for Will, what Will feels about the judge, or any of it, I guess, really. And so if you have left the file out at the time this session begins, perhaps in this specific situation with Will, it's better to be explicitly honest. Let him see the file is there, this clear and symbolic reminder that the work is approaching its end.
You're not going to fail me, are you?
Is obviously a joke, but there's a very natural nervousness to it. Not just, are you going to fail me, but I suppose, what do you think about me as a person?
What's it say? You want to read it? Why?
I think it's also worth remembering, as far as we know, they've never actually spoken about Will's trauma before. Which is fine, in the limited amount of sessions they have. It might be something Will isn't ready for, or that is too big to unpack so close to an ending. You can do some work around trauma without necessarily having to speak about it. That being said, I think Sean is probably deliberately using this file as an indirect avenue into that subject of discussion, just subtly raising the idea of it. I don't think I'd do that, but regardless, Sean is being as honest as he can in offering Will to read it, though I suspect he knows Will won't want to. But maybe he's reassured to know Sean wouldn't withhold the file from him if he wanted to read it.
Have you had any experience with that? 20 years of counseling. Yeah, I've seen some pretty awful shit. I mean, have you had any experience?
Will means personally, which Sean has had, and he's comfortable enough to open up about it if it helps Will. You know, I'm never of the opinion that counsellors have to personally understand or have a connection to what the client's experiences are in order to help them. Obviously, I think it can be useful, and here Sean is able to use it. I've sort of criticised Sean a lot in this series for talking about himself, which isn't to say it's ever exactly been the wrong thing to do. I think in these examples it's been the right thing, and I think often it is the right thing. And obviously I think it's good to build a genuine, authentic connection beyond just the typically therapeutic things a counsellor is supposed to say. I've not criticised in that sense because it's wrong, but just to emphasise that it can be risky and you don't want to get carried away with it, which is true here too. It's possible Sean's own subjective experiences can affect how he perceives Will's experiences. You need to stay aware that there's a difference, otherwise you can become like Jerry, insisting Will needs to be pushed because that's what Jerry felt he needed when he was younger. So I don't think it is essential to have had similar experiences to your client. I think an aware enough counsellor should be able to reach beyond their own experiences and empathise with the client, but obviously it can help, and in this example it does. It helps open up the space. Sean doesn't just answer that he has had experience, but provides an answer in some detail.
Father was an alcoholic. Mean fucking drunk. He'd come home hammered, looking to wail on somebody. So I'd provoke him so he wouldn't go after my mother and little brother. Interesting nights, but when he wore his rings.
To be honest, I think the file actually becomes a very useful prop in this situation now. We are into very uncomfortable waters with this discussion, and for the same reasons I've said counsellors tend not to set up their chairs directly facing one another, it's useful for Sean to have this physical object of the file between them that he can glance down at instead of looking just at Will all the time and adding to the intensity. So Will now responds with his own story.
He used to just put a wrench, a stick, and a belt on the table and just say choose.
You notice, for example, Will isn't looking at Sean right now. He's looking down because, of course he is. This subject is difficult enough to talk about at all, let alone with eye contact. The faint kind of grim humour they both use also, not too forced, just a very soft amount helps soften things too.
I gotta go with the belt there, Vanna.
It's not even really humour, because I think humour could be drawing things away from the emotion and suggesting it's not safe to talk about. This is instead just something very small to soften the blow of what's been said.
I used to go with the wrench.
Why the wrench?
Because fuck him, that's why.
It's agonising to imagine the pain of that, but in its own way, choosing the wrench is Will's only real means of showing strength in that scenario. Showing resistance and fearlessness, despite how terrified and weak he must have felt in that situation.
Your foster father.
Yeah.
Sean then leaves a natural silence to see where Will wants to take this conversation. He brings it back to the file.
So, what is it, like, Will has an attachment disorder? Is it all that stuff? Fear of abandonment? Is that why I broke up with Skylar?
That, I think, is a very indirect, less intense way of telling Sean he broke up with Skylar. Instead of just coming out with it, sliding it in beneath a question about his life and file.
I didn't know you had.
I did.
You want to talk about it?
No.
As I said earlier, sometimes they don't want to talk about it, just for you to be aware, or to know that you're aware. And that's a useful position, because then you can slide that point in at appropriate places. If Will happens to later talk about something that seems to relate back to breaking up with Skylar, you can voice that connection and join those dots. Right now that isn't the pressing point though. Will may have moved the subject towards Skylar, but really this is about past trauma. Sean doesn't let that point sail past just yet.
You see this? All this shit. This is not your fault.
We've got to the point you were probably all waiting for. I think there's a lot that could be said about this scene, yet at the same time it's also kind of straightforward. I think it's a brilliant scene, to be clear. I know a lot of people love it and a lot of people think it's forced and unrealistic. Personally, I think doing this with Will would 100% work if done right. A lot of people see this as some kind of trick or therapy technique. You keep getting closer and more intimate, repeating it's not your fault until eventually Will actually takes it to heart. I can vaguely remember someone commenting on the first video I think I made how they once had a boss at their office job or something who had messed them about with time shifts or something like that, and they'd been annoyed by it, and the boss, sensing that, later rung them up and started doing the it's not your fault thing to them over the phone. Like their boss must have seen the movie the night before and decided, oh, this is a good way to help people, and so just randomly tried it out on his employee. I find that idea both hilarious and horrible. You know, the arrogance of just saying that to someone out of nowhere. If you did try doing this like a technique, it 100% wouldn't work, I don't think. To be honest, I don't think much at all would work in therapy if you did just do it like a technique designed to provide therapy, because that's quite inauthentic, and one of the main rules of therapy is to be authentic. You don't necessarily have to reveal much about yourself, but you certainly don't want to be false and to interact with your client in a forced and unreal manner. That's, I think, why when I've tried to give examples of good things to say in the past with the series, it always sounds awful, because it's not what you'd say, it's a general sort of direction you might lead things in, but you always need to speak as you yourself speak. It works here, but it's not because Sean pressing the point it isn't Will's fault breaks down those barriers naturally or anything. Just saying that wouldn't do so. It works instead because Sean so clearly means what he says. You can hear it in his voice, the deep emotion. It's that reaches into Will's heart much more than his words. And that's what this scene is. More than Sean actually convincing Will is not his fault, it's Sean just being able to send a comforting and warm voice to a place in Will's heart that feels vulnerable. It's that experience of openness, and discovering vulnerability doesn't always have to be painful. It can be positive, comforting, relieving. Which isn't to say the words themselves don't have an impact, because I think they do. They're the truth, which obviously helps. It isn't Will's fault. Will, of course, knows that on a very conscious and intellectual level. There's a lot of things a lot of us know on an intellectual level, yet at the same time we have little stories deep down that say otherwise. We might know something, yet also sort of feel differently. Which again is why Sean needs to speak to Will's heart rather than his head. You know, ask the question, why was Will put through the trauma he was as a child? The simple and probably truthful answer was that his foster father wasn't a nice person, putting it incredibly lightly. We don't know why he wasn't, we don't know what his relationship to Will really was, or any of that, but that's still pretty much the answer. It's not Will's fault. His foster father was the way he was. Children can't be expected to change the people that came before them, nor are they in a capable position to do so, nor is that even the point. The point is, it's not Will's fault. And yet still, the child Will is probably going to have moments where he doubts it. Even if it's my foster father, why does it have to happen to me? Why was I sent to live with this man? Was it punishment I was deemed to deserve? Did my parents abandon me? Was that also because I was deemed to be too horrible? Maybe this is all the world's way of giving me what I deserve. And in that situation, you can't blame a child for letting those doubts creep in at points. Once they're there, unconscious as they may be, it can take a lot to truly relieve them. It means even when Will has grown into an incredibly intelligent man, that he still needs to hear this message from time to time. It's not your fault. As Sean continues to speak, and the deeper emotion and authenticity behind what he's saying, deeper than base words, becomes clear, Will starts to break down. There's something very powerful about the simple zoom on Sean's words here.
No, you don't. It's not your fault.
As important as this message may be for Will to hear, it's also a very difficult one to hear. Because truly taking it in means letting it be spoken to that hurt child inside that he once was, and that's not a part of himself he wants to get in touch with. It would naturally make him feel very vulnerable again. He naturally tends to shut it down. This is why, not just being authentic, it's important Sean has built this close relationship with Will beforehand, and I mean close, not just build rapport as Jerry puts it, but a relationship where Will is able to be a little open and vulnerable at points. He is capable in small ways. He's aired his worries around Skylar. He's just told Sean he broke up with her out of fear. He's just described some of his trauma as a child. This now is admittedly a big step further, one that could have been overwhelming. We see brilliant moments in Matt Damon's acting where Will seems to be trying to resist Sean's words. First half playing it off like a joke, then the jokey way sort of answers. It starts to sound nervous and breathless, then he holds his breath and seems to freeze up altogether. This is incredibly painful for Will. It's why no counsellor can take these sort of things lightly. Which isn't to say therapy is always painless, I don't think that's true. Sometimes it is uncomfortable and difficult and feels like arduous work for you as the client. But at the same time, there's a reason counsellors need to be careful with what they're doing when it comes to this sort of thing. But if we're talking about this example, even just from what we've seen so far, it seems to be working. You know, I said what made this work is Sean being able to send a comforting and a warm voice to the vulnerable parts in Will. And a part of that is Will allowing himself to be comforted, allowing himself even to feel sad rather than to get angry or restless or shut everything down. We already can see the emotion welling up in Will in a way that he ordinarily wouldn't allow it to do so, but this is a safe space. It feels like that now after all these months of therapy. Sean feels like a safe person to truly be vulnerable with, and to allow himself to feel sad around, so he does. He pushes Sean back and says,
Don't fuck with me, alright? Don't fuck with me, Sean, not you.
Which is a heartbreaking line because it speaks so much of Will's past, but even in its delivery, the push isn't too hard a push. The words are faltering. He's half in battle with himself between shutting down the vulnerability and actually letting it loose here, possibly for the first time in years. But feeling vulnerable doesn't have to mean feeling weak and helpless. It can mean feeling comforted, warmed, eased. It can be a beautiful experience. It can mean being hugged by someone who genuinely cares. That's the true therapy of this interaction. The realise that allowing yourself to be comforted can be the best feeling in the world, not just one that makes you feel helpless. I think that's Will's true realisation more than any intellectual point about it not being his fault. It's such a good scene, no small part due to the acting, which is really the one thing I haven't talked about much this entire series. I tend to just talk about the characters as though they were real, to the extent that some people joke in the comments I didn't realise this was a movie. But both actors are phenomenal here. This scene moves you because of them, not the camera work, not the dialogue as great as it is, not the piano that comes in at the end, just their very heartfelt acting. It ends with Sean saying softly,
Fuck them, okay?
which is a great final line because it is just comfort. That's all Will needs at this moment. Not deeper explanation, no interpretations, nothing but a chance to cry and be comforted, and then probably some good downtime afterwards. I think this scene itself is 100% realistic when you do remember it's not a technique but a very genuine moment. I think there are a few caveats though. For example, you need to have done all the work in the previous sessions that led towards this. I think you need downtime after, and I also think just one experience of being able to cry and be comforted like this is probably not enough on its own. You'd likely need more occurrences to follow in other sessions with Sean to really embed the experience as a good thing. You know, because as nice as this moment will feel for Will, he could still come away afterwards feeling embarrassed and awkward about it, and then wanting to push back in retaliation the following lesson to kind of assert his strength again. So realistically, I think you might need more experiences than just the one, but then again, maybe not in every situation, who knows. What I will mention actually, because it's surprisingly relevant when I think about it now, is my Katie series of videos. There are events in that book which are strikingly similar to this scene here. There's an episode upcoming at some point in which this is made clear. I don't know if I've released that by the time this video here is out, because the Good Will Hunting ones always take a while of copyright disputes. So maybe you'll have seen that video, maybe it's out to see, so look forward to that if you're into the Katie series, and if you're not familiar with it, maybe give that series a look. I've got a playlist set up for the series so far. Let's talk about the actual ending now though. Following this scene is where the film really wraps up. Will goes for a job interview seriously, and we get this minute of his final session with Sean, talking it over.
I went down there and I talked to my boss and my new boss. He seemed like a good guy.
And Sean asks him the important
Is
question.
that what you want?
And when Will is able to answer with a fairly confident yes, he says,
Good for you.
of course we'll soon discover what he really wants right now is to go after Skylar, which he'll realise quickly, but that doesn't mean he doesn't also want a job like this and probably won't reapply later on. No doubt they'll still be just as keen to hire him. Sean announces, as he ever has, that time's up, and there's some natural awkwardness, as with most endings. There's quite a lot of pauses in the dialogue here, and Will struggles at first to make eye contact, but he does try, despite that, to show his gratitude.
Just want you to know, Sean, that you're welcome, Will.
Personally, I don't much like the idea of cutting someone off before they can say thank you, because they might want or even need to express that gratitude, and they should be given that chance first. But basically, Sean gives him his contact details, they then hug, and Will does then get his chance to say,
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Will.
Sean genuinely means that thank you too. I talked about it somewhere before. Clients very rarely realise just how much you mean to them, and how much you too often get from the experience of working with them. Not often so dramatically as Sean does in this film, but still, it's true they matter to you, and that you do want to thank them in return quite often, even if they might not truly understand why. I think it's like they say that parents learn as much from their kids as kids do from their parents, but they end on a fitting joke that suits.
You just violate the patient-doctor relationship. Only if you grab my ass.
I think hugging is a bit of a safeguarding minefield at times. Often it's a good thing to do. We saw in the last session just how much a hug was needed, even though technically counsellors probably aren't supposed to do that. Although that's much more of children, I suppose. Will is a bit older, but sometimes it's the right thing to do. Other times it would feel a bit too much closeness, where maybe just an arm around the shoulder or being a little closer to them is enough for some people. I think you need to judge these things in the moment, or maybe sometimes just ask what the client wants, if they want to be hugged or not. And I tend to think if the client is engaging you for a hug, then you absolutely have to hug them back. To do anything else would be a terrible rejection. They say take care as Will leaves to the door. Then Sean stops him to say,
Good luck, son.
and that's it. As the counsellor, you then have to watch your client step out that door and move on to the rest of their life, which is always both a deeply uplifting and saddening experience. Because you do miss them, and you don't forget them, and if it's not a situation like Will's where you do get to keep in contact, then you're probably left wondering what happens to them, possibly for the rest of your life. My favourite line here is Sean saying,
You do what's in your heart, son, you'll be fine.
because it's technically saying, I have faith in you, you don't need me anymore. Because sometimes I think much more than any help, showing faith and trust in someone is the most helpful and empowering thing of all. And obviously he does have faith, why wouldn't he? We might not know exactly what will come of Will's future, but he's in a strong position now. Hard as it always is at times, he'll come out doing alright. Whatever alright means, I don't know, but he'll do it. And this is now where the series comes to its end too. I've had a great time. That's an understatement. I hope you have too. You've all left some wonderful comments, not just very touching ones or complimentary ones, but some very useful additions or amendments to stuff I've said in my rambling manner. I just hope you stick around for whatever comes next. I'll no doubt do some polls or community posts asking for people's thoughts, but as I've said, check out my KD series, which is technically the natural progression of this series, even if it's never going to have a wide popularity. Check out my Breakfast Club videos, Spirited Away, Lord of the Rings scene analysis, various other series I'm already doing, various others I'm no doubt going to start in the near future. As I've said, there's so many shows and films and other things where I could analyse the therapy scenes from, and hopefully make different points to what I've made in this series. If you enjoyed or got anything from this video or this series, please give it a like to help me. Leave your thoughts down below, subscribe if you do fancy sticking around for any of my other stuff, or even support me on Patreon, but that's up to you. All I can say now, having come to the end of this massive series in my life, is hopefully see you next time. And as ever, a special thank you goes to Devin, Kestrel, Arwen, Janice McMahon, Luke Hall, KrzychuKB, Michael Gallagher, InSquares, Dustin Paulson, Samara Salsi, Sharroff2814, Joshua C. Follier, Chad Bramwell, Incomplete Sentence, and Nicholas Patrick. Thank you.